Ace money the shit. Working that bitch. Ballin' like Swish. Diamonds wet like a fish. Pull up with them sticks. Come fuck with the clique. We fucked on your bitch. She sucking the dick.
So, Bill, how come both mandatories can make a fight with the sanctioning body allowing these fights to carry on when neither one of them activated their mandatory position with Devin Haney? Isn't the WBC supposed to give them 90 days in order to make the fight? And if they don't make the fight, they should give up their belt. Isn't that something what's not happening?
Yeah, great question. Great question as well, Rap Star. When you talk about the mandatories, right? And hold on one second. Hold on 1 second. Hey, so that's a great question. And when you talk about the mandatories, right? You talk about we actually get a chance to now see where Devin can have a mandatory and the mandatory not be willing to fight, right? When you talk about Ryan Garcia, who we went out to Dallas, Texas, right, to watch him in the eliminator between him and Luke Campbell, right? Him win, and then soon as he simultaneously get out the ring, he starts asking for someone else. So we actually got a chance to, and the people have gotten a chance to see a fighter fight for the mandatory position and then choose to do something else. So this has not been uncommon for us, right? This has not been uncommon that Devin has been in a position that mandatories have not been willing to fight him, even being in the mandatory position.
So isn't the sanctioning body actually their part to blame over here, because they're not activating the position for taking the interim belt from Ryan Garcia? They're not activating the 90 days where he can activate his position with Devin Haney. So why isn't the WBC being vocal about that situation? That's what I'm confused about, Bill.
Well, actually, that's why I said is that you can see that the teams, right? Fighters can come on and say one thing, right? And then the teams actually behind the scenes, right, could be working and doing something else, right? In the sense of what you saw in us was that when it came for Devin to be the mandatory, right? It came to be the mandatory of Lomachenko. We did everything possible. When it came to the time to becoming a mandatory, we were willing to get in the WBC tournament with Teofimo Lopez, Javier Fortuna, Zaira Abdulaev, right? So, of course, Teofimo Lopez went the other direction, that he said that he would go an easier route to get to Lomachenko, right? We stayed in the tournament. Javier Fortuna, according to even as early as today when I talked to Samson, right?
Yeah.
Said that he didn't activate being in the tournament or activate his mandatory, right? When you talk about Javier Fortuna being a mandatory and choosing to make a contract with someone else, that he pointed out earlier today as well. So you know what I mean? It's not just the WBC part, because when we did our due diligence, that's why we have the belt. We activated at every position, right, that we were in, we activated. And people said, okay, well, how did you get the belt? How did you get the belt? Well, by activating yourself, by putting yourself in a position that you want the fight to happen. And when the fighters don't fight, then they got to move out the way.
Yeah, and respectfully, I think we also saw the video when WBC came out and said they gave you the fight for interim fight with Zahur Abdul Aliyev. They said that if you make that fight, you become an interim position.
Absolutely.
And they're gonna move Lomachenko, and they had a meeting to say they're gonna make Lomachenko their elite franchise champion.
Okay,
so
great.
that he can
fight.
He can fight for another title, Bill. Do you remember that video? Because I've got that video.
Yeah, another great point, Rap Star, that you point out. But it's and I always say that the rubber meets the road, and the alibis start catching up, the lies start catching up, and everything. What you then see as we fought for the interim belt, right, and being an interim champion. Now Devin, right, can either fight Ryan Garcia, right, or move out the way, right. And once you become the interim champion, right, Ryan Garcia has fought Luke Campbell to become the interim champion, and with the idea that he's going to fight Devin Haney, right? So he's already the champion. If Devin Haney wouldn't fight him, and chose to go franchise or chose to go champion in recess, then Ryan Garcia becomes the full world champion because he is the interim champion. You see what I mean? So that was the point of us fighting, because it made no sense. When we were in the WBC tournament to fight, right? We've won every single belt in the WBC, the silver, the international, the youth belt. We've won every belt, right? So it made no sense that coming from the tournament, winning the interim champion, that if Lomachenko chose to do anything else, there was no one else to fight. So similar to now, right? You would then say to Ryan Garcia, who's fought to become the interim champion, that it would be preposterous that he would have to fight anyone else if he didn't choose to. So he came and he chose to then fight Javier Fortuna, for Javier Fortuna to get his #1 spot back.
Yeah, but how can the WBC allow this fight to take place when they didn't even allow the guy to activate his mandatory position with Devin Haney? They didn't even give the 90 days window, like another sanctioning body will give you a 90 days window to activate your clause. Now, they're allowing these fights to carry on in front of your eyes, Bill. So they're just as corrupted as anyone else. You got to blame the sanctioning body before you blame any fighter. You can't blame the fighter when the sanctioning body is the one allowing this shit to happen in front of our eyes.
Well, if you can become, you can ask that you fight to have an interim title, or you can ask to have a fight as a franchise title. If you can ask to become the mandatory, then where do you place the blame on the WBC when everybody is asking the WBC for what they want? We wanted to be in a position to become interim champion, just like Ryan Garcia is, to then petition to fight the champion for the full world champion, whether or not he was there or not. So what Ryan Garcia is in a position, just like Lomachenko was in the position of being the full world champion, Devin being the interim champion, right? And that would be like Devin just moving out the way. And Lomachenko's Lomachenko, the case of Lomachenko, he then petitioned to them to become the franchise champion, which made you not be able to have any challengers. So Devin can be challenged by Ryan Garcia right now if he wanted it, right? He fought for it. He fought the eliminator. He fought the stuff similar to what same thing that Devin did in Zaire Abdullah. But you see that Devin activated his and Ryan Garcia didn't.
Yeah, but we also got to recognize that the WBC shouldn't be allowing Ryan Garcia to still have the interim title, to fight Javier Fortuna. There's no pressure in the foundation. There's no pressure coming up from the sanctioning body for the fighter to fight Devin Haney.
Okay,
so it just seems to me that the sanctioning body is part of this whole corrupt bullshit.
Well, great point.
It is. It's part of it.
Great point again, Rapstar. But when you talk about the interim champion, the interim champion nor the franchise champion is the world champion. They have no responsibilities. They have no obligations to anyone. They cannot be challenged, right? So that's not the case. When you talk about Javier Fortuna, right, and you talk about Ryan Garcia, they made a deal. They made a deal for Ryan Garcia, Javier Fortuna, to become the interim champion, and then once he's the interim champion, he could have the same liberty and the privilege that Ryan Garcia has to challenge Devin.
Yeah, but what they're doing now, they already had the interim belt. Ryan Garcia is duplicating it and repeating himself. And he's going back for the same belt, what he already fought for. So for me, that doesn't make sense for the sanctioning body. All the sanctioning body is doing is making money and making the fights. And for me, they never gave you the mandatory. They never put the pressure on that. So you're fighting another voluntary. But I believe that the sanctioning body.
Well, see, just like if you heard earlier today, we would have had a mandatory and Javier Fortuna, but Javier Fortuna, according to even Sampson, he decided he made a deal, and he made a deal to fight Leonardo. He made a deal to fight Luke Campbell. He made a deal. So when you talk about the mandatory, you can't force the mandatory to enforce his mandatory position, because sometimes the mandatory will say, right, I'm not ready to fight that. And then once the mandatory does not challenge the champion, right? Then the champion has the voluntary.
How long can the mandatory do this for?
Okay, well, listen. If you don't, just like Samson said today, right? Is when he didn't activate the mandatory. He then put the champion in a position to have the voluntary, and us pick Gamboa. Similar to what Ryan Garcia did. He didn't activate the mandatory, and then we picked Jorge Linares.
So how long can you do that for, Bill?
Well, you cannot force the mandatory. If Javier Fortuna beat Ryan Garcia and became the interim champion, we couldn't force the interim champion.
Yeah, but how long can he keep that title without activating his mandatory position?
No, you don't. No. Listen, how long can who keep it?
How long can Ryan Garcia or Javier Fortuna keep the interim title without activating the clause of the position to fight for the world champion?
Well, you see what happened. The WBC mandated and ordered them to fight.
Right.
You see?
Yeah, but how long can they stay away with not fighting the fight that we want with Devin Haney? How long can they keep that interim title and keep moving in another direction?
They can move away from fighting the world champion for as long as they want to. The champion has to sit there and has to wait until he's being challenged by the mandatory.
So the WBC won't put a 90 days clause in order for them to activate their mandatory position, so they don't take the belt from them. Because I'm reading the the actual laws of the federation, right?
They can put the 90-day on there.
So why are they not doing it?
Well, listen, they put the 90-day on there after we would fight Linares, right? Then we would have a 90 day to defend against the winner, right? Of them. So we have that. But then once that 90 day, once that happens, then it's up to the challenger, right, to then activate his position. He goes and he says, "Okay, I'm ready to fight."
And if he says he's not ready to fight, does he lose his interim title?
Then he'll lose his position.
Yes, he will.
He'll lose his position at being able to challenge the champion, and then the champion then has a voluntary.
So why didn't the WBC do that to Javier Fortuna this time? Why didn't they put the 90-day window on his head? Why didn't they put that on his neck?
Well, the reason why Javier Fortuna lost his mandatory position is because when Devin Haney came back from shoulder surgery, just like what we said on today's sample on the show, when Devin Haney came back from shoulder surgery, right. we petitioned, right? Because we didn't have a belt. We were champion of recess. So we petitioned to fight Javier Fortuna for the vacant belt. But Samson did not activate the position because he said he had a contract to fight for something else.
Right. So basically, if Ryan Garcia really needed if they really wanted to make Ryan Garcia fight, the sanctioned body could have put the pressure on him, but they allowing these fights to happen in order for them to maybe just make more money then. So it's the sanctioning body again that we got to blame, as well as the fighters. We do need to go back to the sanctioning body. I know you got all the respect for the sanctioning body, but we as fans, we're looking at what's going on, and we can only go by what's going on, Bill.
That's another great point. But when you talk about that, when you look at it from the other side, is you say, well, when you had Devin Haney that was in that position, he was raised in hell. He was raised in hell to fight anybody to go from the interim champion to the full world champion. Even if that meant fighting Lomachenko, if it meant fighting Javier Fortuna, it didn't make a difference. And once you have a fighter that has that same fire and that same zest about it, then you'll have a true mandatory and a true world champion meet.
Right. Hey, what's up, Bill? I have a quick question. This whole Lopez and Haney, it's honestly getting kind of old for me. I know everybody loves this subject.
It's older than Earl Spence and Terrence Crawford.
I don't want. That's the thing. I don't want it to get to that level, to the Spence and Crawford thing. My question is this: if you guys are you guys
Devin is 22. Devin is 22 years old. You've lost patience already.
No. I'm just talking about the whole Teofimo Haney going back and forth every day. What I'm trying to say is, how come you guys don't do the same thing that Teofimo did with you guys at 140? And what I mean by that is, how come you guys don't go to 140 and establish yourself as the champion before Teofimo established himself as a champion at 140, maybe by
Well,
calling out.
you have Jack Contrell. You have Jack Contrell that people don't tend to want to talk about. Jack Contrell has had a position that he could actually fight for a world title, and he stepped aside. So you know what I mean. When you talk about this is not uncommon for the mandatory or the guy in the number one position to do something else different. No different than y'all hold on one second. No different. You see what I'm saying? So
I understand that, but
when we talk about 135, we talk about the deepest division that you guys named. You guys named off a lot of fighters, and we think that it's a hell of an opportunity to make some great fights happen at 135.
So you guys have no interest in the fighters at 140 for now, like Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez, Jose Cepeda. Like you guys are not looking at none of that right now.
Oh, I love a fight with Jose Cepeda. I talk to H Money about that fight all the time, right? But when you talk about going up to 140 and not being in a position to make these fights happen with all these wonderful, talented fighters at 135, it's just something that we have to decide on the team on our next move.
Right.
You know,
I was just trying to say, like, beat them to the punch, just like Teofimo beat you guys to the punch with Loma. I was just trying to say maybe it would be a good idea for you guys to beat them this time, for you guys to be the man at 140 and not the other way around. That was what I was getting at.
Yeah, no, great point. But when we talk about, when we talk about beating anyone to the punch, or we talk about anything like that, right? When all sincerity, everyone is making moves. The fight that the people still continuously want to see is Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez. No matter what moves have been made, what fighters have been fought, you know what I mean? That's a great fight that the people want to see. And we're available to make it because if Rapstar is still on and Rapstar takes a look at the rule book and looks at what a franchise champion is and what he can do, a franchise champion similar to what an Emperor's champion is. And our Emperor's champion at 135, believe it or not, is Mikey Garcia, who can then activate his mandatory position and jump in front of everyone. The franchise champion is a designation. It's an ability to then come back and become the mandatory for the full world title. And that's what Teofimo Lopez can do. He can become the mandatory. If Rapstar is saying, when can we see it and all the stuff, Teofimo Lopez can become the mandatory, and it could be a great fight.